Okay. Welcome to the podcast, the Tech Ketchup Show, Arjun, and I hope you have a great conversation with us and you have a great time today in the show.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great. So, I would like to begin the conversation on the very basic note that since you are involved in a lot of blockchain things currently, how did your encounter actually happen with blockchain, or how did you get to know the basics of blockchain for the first time? How was that interaction, and how was it for you to
Sure,
get to
sure.
know about something that was not quite obvious at that point of time? And it
Right.
may be
So
that
for
obvious
me,
right now also, but yeah.
no, things are a lot better now. There's so much
Yeah,
more information. There's also so much more misinformation, but I hope to
exactly.
clear some of that up as well. So my encounter with blockchain started back in 2016. So at that time, I was in Tech Mahindra, and I was researching new technologies, right, which could
Okay.
be potential big business units tomorrow. And I was reporting to the chief technology officer at the time. And in my research, obviously, I went through AI, I went through machine learning, and sort of I was looking at all the different things out there. And then I stumbled upon blockchain.
Okay.
And it was such a fascinating concept for me, right? This decentralized way of thinking, and how there are no centralized authorities, etc. It's completely different, or something very anti what you normally experience, right? And what you've
Exactly.
experienced in your life. So I think that really struck me as something which is very, very different, very refreshing. So I sort of started going down the rabbit hole, and then I kept doing more and more research, and I kept like looking into, what is this all about, what are public
Mm,
blockchains, private blockchains, and all of that stuff, and
mm,
cryptocurrencies. And then that's kind of where the fascination started. And then so luckily, we started a business, blockchain business unit
okay.
in the company as well. And then, so that's kind of where my story started. And yeah, that's when I first learned about blockchain. Of course, this was like a little strange because at that time there wasn't like a lot of documentation available. Like even on Medium,
Exactly.
for example, there were maybe like 5 or 7 good articles which explained what the concept was. And it was very difficult to understand. And it took me some time, I
Yeah.
to sort of really grasp this sort of new way of thinking, and why the blockchain database is designed the way it is. How does decentralized and distributed computing work? And
Exactly.
what this essentially means, and in terms of as a technology and as a concept, and how
Yeah.
it could potentially disrupt things. So it took me a while to get there, which is why I feel that even today when you read about blockchain technology, and it can seem intimidating initially, and that's fine. Like that's perfectly fine. If you just read about it a bit more, spend some more time on it, you'll begin to understand why so many people call it like the second coming of the internet, and why it's
Exactly.
sort of poised to be a very, very disruptive technology for the future. So yeah.
So like when was this for the first time, like you had your first interactions with the blockchain? When was it? Like could you just recall that year or something? When was it?
So this was yeah. So this was I remember exactly. I think this was about the third week of June in 2016 when I
Okay.
was first researching it. And it was quite yeah, it was quite a jolt to my system. And then I read the other things, right? That this is this has been existing since way back in
Yeah.
2009. And I had read about that entire Silk Road episode, right, where this
Okay.
a person was running this site, and he was using Bitcoin for
Exactly.
payments, and he was doing selling, like, for example, drugs and stuff. And
Yeah.
I'd heard about it fleeting, but I never really looked into it. I thought, yeah, must be something, I don't know. But then I read about it. I realized. Then I also saw other things, like the founder of this whole concept of
Hmm.
Bitcoin is completely anonymous. Like, we still don't know who that person is.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
We don't.
I think the more, so yeah, we still don't know, right? So the deeper you go into the rabbit hole, sometimes
Exactly.
it seems really strange, but it also, you kind of begin to understand how this new way of thinking is potentially the way we need to think for the future, right? And in all spheres, not just in computing, but like even
Hmm.
when we look at things like um power generation, right? Like, for
Hmm.
example, we are used to having power grids and
Hmm.
lines which run to places, and then you apply for a power connection, etc. But nowadays solar cells are disrupting this, right? Where you can sort of be self-sufficient in many ways in terms of electrical power. And in places like Germany, etc., people produce so much electricity using solar sometimes that they're able to sell that to other people,
Exactly.
right? So here also you've taken something like power generation, which is typically centralized, where it happens in one place, and then it is the power is beamed to other places, to a decentralized way, where everybody is producing some amount of power and then they can trade that amongst each other.
Yeah,
Right. So we see this decentralization coming into many different sort of areas of our life. So I think, yeah, it's very exciting, and to read about it, and I think more and more people, as they get interested into it, they'll begin to
mm,
understand why it's so amazing and why it's considered so disruptive. So yeah.
exactly. Also, like, I would like to know, since when you started about learning about blockchain and then digging deep into all those things, decentralization and everything, how has the word come to uh, accept the fact that things can be decentralized, like at that point of time when you were
Right.
beginning, and now what's the kind of mindset, what's the difference in the mindset that you usually
Right.
see while you're talking to people about blockchain and decentralization?
So I think so at a concept level, I think this is sort of really sort of forced people to think differently, right? About the way lives and the way general governments and the
Hmm,
way the financial system and several other things these days are structured, right?
exactly.
So I think the root of all of this, essentially, when you think about these things and how it is solved, is essentially democracy,
Okay.
right? So democracy as a concept, when it was born, right, is essentially what is like, if you look at elections in general, right, what
Hmm,
are elections? So elections is one giant consensus mechanism,
exactly.
right? So in blockchain parlance, you talk a lot about consensus and things like that. That's exactly what election is. So we needed to choose who would lead the nation, right? So we created this concept that every man is equal, and all the votes are the same, and everybody votes. Then you choose local leaders, who then choose sort of regional leaders, who then choose sort of the leader who's going to be the leader for the country. So if you look at the way the how our thought process was structured, it was structured in a very centralized manner, right? That essentially decision making happens at the top, the decisions flow down, right? And of course, what binds all of this together is data. So the more data you have about what is happening at the ground level, the better decisions you can make at the top, right?
Hmm,
And this is exactly how everything else was structured, right? So democracy came along. Then of course, there were other forms. So for example, people tried, like for example, fascist governments, etc., but that
yeah,
didn't work out too well. Then people tried, sort of monarchies, didn't work out too well. And then essentially over a period of time, even democracy evolved in many different ways, where every country has their own form of democracy. For example, so the US government has their own form, we have our own system,
exactly.
right? And there are many variants of the same, but essentially the basic concept remains the same, that in frankly democracy also and monarchy and fascism, is that the decision making comes from the top,
Hmm,
right? And we as people select, or rather, on the basis of certain merits and demerits, we select who the leaders are going to be, who are going to eventually decide policy.
hmm,
Now, decentralized thinking, right, is an entirely different way of thinking. So here is where you've taken decision making from the top and you brought it back to the bottom,
hmm,
right? And the reason why it is possible today is because of technology. Right. So, for example, if you look at a country, so India here is a good example, right? So, if you look at a country with all the terrain, with all the diversity in thought, language, religion, all the differences, which also sort of sometimes divide, but also bind us together,
exactly.
is that taking this kind of decision making at the bottom level is very difficult,
Hmm,
right? And which is why we created this selection mechanism. But now that everybody has a mobile phone, they're connected, and so everybody today has a computing device, which is a mobile phone, and it is also network. So you're connected to each other, right, through 3G, 4G, or whatever. So now you can take decision making, which is earlier happening at the top, you can take it to the ground level, because now that vehicle exists, which never existed before, right?
hmm,
Otherwise, how would you today go to a far reaches in, for example, in, let's say, the border towns of, like, let's say, India, and and be able to sort of take the sort of feedback from the people there, right? The
hmm,
only way out is really technology. Otherwise, the only other way is you have to fly there, you have to talk to people, then bring that feedback back. The only way out is technology. So number one most important thing to understand is that decentralization is possible today, and what has made it possible is technology, and the fact that all of us have computing devices, and all of us have computing devices which are networked, right? So we can
exactly.
sort of operate in this manner. Now, of course, when we look at democracy and the way, when you look at the top down approach of decision making, we've seen the pitfalls as well. We've seen
Yeah.
that top down essentially also creates centralization of power, right? And
Hmm,
centralization of power can lead to a high degree of misuse, So, and there are several examples for this, right? So I think the, example which everybody quotes is when the financial crisis happened in 2008, and the
Exactly.
world governments, like, there was this financial meltdown, and institutions which existed for hundreds of years, ceased to exist. And also, what is also a striking point is, after like the whole habla, nothing really happened. Like, barely anyone went to jail. There were some
Right.
fines which were immediately paid out by the people involved in this. And that's kind of where, a lot of these concepts start to take root in people's minds, that maybe power needs to be in some way decentralized, and that while centralized power, has this, sort of, let's say, centralized power always seems to have this extra agility, right, where you can take decisions quickly and then, have them flow down and percolate them. You can do the same with decentralized power today as well. Like, for example, if you're able to ID, let's say, technology devices as unique, and if you can, like, let's say, think past the technical difficulties, you can also do instant decision making today, because everybody has phones. And of course, I mean, there are technical challenges, and how this could, how you prevent fraud and things like that, but technical challenges can be solved because they're technical challenges. And so this kind of agility in decision making you can also now do at the bottom, right? And this is kind of what you see in the world today. And like, when I talked about power production, now that, you've taken power generation from centralized to, like, in a decentralized manner. And for example, nowadays, you see that in corporate organizations as well, where they say that, we have a flat structure, right?
Hmm.
There are no, like, layers anymore. It's a flat structure, and all decisions are taken as a as a collective. So slowly this kind of thinking is sort of pervading, right, society at large. And blockchain is just one of them. Like, blockchain essentially is just technology, right, which
Exactly.
enables this kind of decentralization and distributed way of thinking. But this concept in general is catching on more steam, where people are realizing that, number one, centralized power has its pitfalls. Number two,
Hmm.
the same agility or speed of decision making which happens at a centralized, power level, can also be done in a decentralized manner, because now the technology exists. Right. So now that this is happening, so which is why I feel that this decentralized way of thinking about everything, not just government, about policy making,
Hmm.
but in general, even about commerce, will eventually sort of start taking on more steam, because it's possible now, right? And in many cases, it's also being demonstrated, like I said, in certain corporate organizations where decisions are taken differently now, versus, one man deciding what has to be done, everybody going along with it. Like, it's more collective decision making now. And I feel that this concept will catch, like, more steam, and then it will pervade all sections of society, and then will lead to something wonderful. What the final outcome will be, I also don't know. Who's to
Yeah.
say? But I do feel that this will make, like, our lives better in some manner. Yeah.
Exactly. Also, like, you talked about the concept of decentralization and democracy in general, but one thing which
Mhm.
I actually feel or kind of believe for the looking at the
Mhm.
current scenario, even if we
Right.
like, even if we are trying to change our mindset and trying to make those decision making powers a lot decentralized, but
Yes.
the organizations or the people who actually hold the power of making
Mhm.
it decentralized, or for like, there are bodies governing those things who have the power to make things decent.
Right.
uh, why would
Right, but they'll never let go of power, is
Yeah,
essentially what you're saying.
why would
Yeah,
they try to give that decision making to a lot of people and make it centralized, when because then
yeah,
obviously there are pros and cons of everything, but
exactly, right, and right,
but when you give power of decision making to to the masses, it kind of
right.
it kind of makes you lose your control over them.
No, that I completely agree with, and like this is the same question, same sort of argument which comes up when we say, right, that why don't politicians let go of the police, and stop controlling the police, and let them do their police work? See, if they let them do their police work, the first people that the police will arrest are the politicians. so, so that will never
Yeah,
happen,
that's
right?
that's something which is hypocritical
Right.
in, like, in the major senses. It's quite hypocritical.
I I don't disagree there, and see, so let's now try to solve for the problem of decision making, right?
Exactly.
And so that you understand this better, right?
Exactly.
So how do you make good decisions? Like, how does one make good decisions? So the general adage and the general accepted fact and proven fact also is that the more data you have, the
Hmm.
better decision you can make, right? And
Okay.
of course, there are other factors like your ability to parse large amounts of data, which we are solving
Hmm.
today using computing.
Hmm.
right? Where, for example, where earlier we had lots and lots of data. Today we can do like, statistical analysis, etc. at, at a click of a button, and,
Hmm.
understand trends and be able to visualize them. So the general consensus, so the general thinking is which is correct in my opinion, is more data leads to better decisions, right?
Hmm.
Now you are taking decision making from centralized authorities to, let's say, a decentralized form of, let's say, decision making. Now, this form of decision making would only work if there was also perfect information, right? So,
Hmm.
what is this perfect information? Perfect information means everybody has access to all the information at all times, right?
Okay.
Which the internet also allows these days. So, for example, I on my mobile phone, when I start, let's say, reading the news in the morning, somebody in some far flung area somewhere, across the world is also has access to the same information. So, the internet has done that. It has given everybody access to the same information. This has also led to misinformation,
Point.
right? Where we see people, spreading misinformation. But ultimately, right? Ultimately, if everybody has access to perfect information, right, then everybody should ideally be able to make optimal decisions. Now,
Hmm.
there are many other factors here as well, like, for example, the person itself. Like, so we are also slave to our biases, which
Hmm.
many of them are, which come from, let's say, our backgrounds, our environments, and
Yeah.
things like that. And of course, for perfect decision making, you need to overcome those biases and be very, very objective, when it comes to, looking at things. So there are problems there as well. But, but then again, those are problems with the individual,
Hmm.
right, which have to be solved at the individual level. Like, I
Hmm.
cannot solve your biases for you. At some point
Exactly.
you have to, figure out, what biases you have and see how it's holding you back. But if you were to just talk about decision making in general, this sort of decentralized decision making, why I'm saying it's possible is because now it is increasingly becoming easier to have the system of perfect information where everybody has access to, let's say, the same information at the same time,
Hmm.
thereby allowing them to make maybe the best decision. And, of course, now people have found ways to hack it. And like I told you, right, there's
Hmm.
misinformation. So now I can feed you misinformation and change your decision. And we see that on social media, and then these trolls and all of that, and everybody's
Exactly.
flaming each other. So this problem is also there. And now, of course, people are coming up with spam filters, like things like that. So there is, so this march of technology, and, sort of we keep going on. But
Hmm.
again, coming back to core decision making, perfect information means best decision making, and this is possible today because technology allows it. Now, to the other question which you mentioned, that why would anybody let go of the power they have and give it to,
Exactly.
that's a difficult question to answer. I also feel that, like, there will have to be a certain level of, so what I believe also is that, see, we have grown up, or, have this sort of this decision making process of centralized power, which has come from the time when we had leaders, to kings,
Hmm.
to then, monarchies which spanned millennia, so, like, and then, like, for example, the Roman Empire you know existed for
Yeah.
such a long period of time.
Exactly.
And then eventually we came down to, so we are very attuned to centralized decision making, right,
Hmm.
even as human beings over thousands of years, not something which happened, like, I'm just talking, democracy is a relatively new
Yeah.
concept, right? So we are very used to this. So this this decentralized thinking is completely, like, warps people's minds. And
Hmm.
initially, even I found it difficult to accept, like, how is this even going to work, like, operationally, like, how is this supposed to work? But then the more I dive deeper into it, I realized that, to an extent, given the pros and cons, this may actually be the best way forward,
Hmm.
right? And as time progresses, thought processes will change. Of course, how this will be reflected in society is anybody's guess. But
Hmm.
I do feel that this way of thinking has now gathered steam and will continue to gather more steam. And then, eventually, at some point, we will have this kind of system where everybody sort of, takes decisions as a collective versus, that, he is the leader we have chosen and you will make the
Yeah.
decisions, like, something like that. So we will, I think, move away from that. So yeah.
Exactly. Also, there's one thing when we talk on the technology front of making things decentralized,
Mhm.
or for example, blockchain. Taking the case of blockchain itself, uh, how
Mhm.
has the progress been since? I would not call the inception because it was like
Right.
there was certain
Back
period.
in 2009.
Yeah,
Right.
but from past 5 6 years, the technology is being prevalent and researches are being done in that
Definitely.
field. How has that progress been
Definitely.
from that point of time till now?
So, I think there has been, a huge amount of progress, right? So back, I remember, like I was telling you, when I first started reading about blockchain, there was no information available. Like, it was
Hmm.
hardly few blogs, etc. You had to put in serious amount of effort before you came to a point where you understood things and why the technology it is, and, how why it is the way it is. And when this
Exactly.
happens, there's always this niche group of people who know everything, and then there are this large group of people who have,
Hmm.
like, no idea. But what has happened over the past 4 or 5 years is that there's a lot more information now. Right now, there is information, for example, on YouTube, etc., which is there for public consumption. There are also several courses on how the blockchain technology works, how you could potentially get started with that technology. So, to an extent, the education aspect, is getting solved. Then, when I come to the technology itself, it is becoming more refined. So, when people, first came out with blockchain technology, there was a very, how do you say, idealistic understanding that oh, this will be like this and it will solve everything and all of that. But
Okay.
people have realized that blockchain also has its limitations.
Hmm.
You cannot use blockchain technology everywhere. There are only certain
Yeah.
places where blockchain technology is very, very useful, while certain places where it should never be used.
Exactly.
So this kind of information and this kind of sort of, you could say, thinking now has come into place where people are a lot more smarter about how this technology has to be applied and where it has to be applied. Now, coming to the technology aspect, like let's leave the education aside.
Hmm.
Coming to the technology itself, there's been a huge evolution as well, right? And this is kind of where, like, what we are doing also starts to become increasingly relevant, and essentially a way forward for blockchain
Okay.
technology and its evolution. Is that people realize that the way the blockchain technology itself was designed was very restrictive, in the sense that it was very low performance. You could only do, let's say, a few transactions in let's say, so the throughput of blockchain, without getting into specifics, was very slow. It was also costly to interact and work with blockchain technology.
Hmm.
At Polygon, we have tried to solve this, right? So
Hmm.
we were Matic Network. Now we've rebranded ourselves to Polygon, and what we are trying to do is build like sort of a scalability layer
Okay.
around blockchain. So what we've done is that we've taken the most popular and the most blockchain, which is which has the largest ecosystem, the most diverse, and in our opinion, like one of the best
Hmm.
ecosystems, which is Ethereum, and built like
Yeah.
a scalability layer around it, like a high
Okay.
performance layer, which allows you to then do things which were not possible with blockchain.
Hmm.
And this whole sort of, you could say, a conversation about scalability was also kind of new. Like it is something which started in 2016, 2017, when people, more and more people, started getting into blockchain, and the blockchain networks in general started getting clogged.
Hmm.
People realized that it doesn't seem scalable at all. I mean, how is the entire world supposed to use something like this? But
Exactly.
like, what, that's kind of where our story started. So that's kind of where Matic Network was conceived in 2017. And
Okay.
the whole idea was to solve for the scalability problem, and to a large extent we've been very successful. And today we've been able to build this scalability layer, which allows people to draw out, you could say, the real power of blockchain, and be able
Okay.
to use it in every sphere. For example, whether it's payments, gaming, whether it's social media, whatever have you. Like, today, like, that exists,
Okay.
because we built that scalability, and there are several other people who've done that as well. So scalability is sort of a technical problem. There are bound to be many solutions, but our solution has worked out really well. It's proved itself to be production ready. So this is kind of what I've seen on, you could say, the education and thought process side, where there is a lot of
Hmm.
evolution as well, and there's a lot of more material available today if you want to learn about this. But also on the technology as well, that it's become more production ready and more ready for, let's say, mass adoption
Yeah.
compared to what it was maybe in 2016 or 17. So
Yeah. Like you mentioned one point that the power of blockchain is massive. So
right.
could you explain that statement with context to certain fields or domains, so that we
Sure.
could understand that how actually can blockchain be a disruptive thing to go for in that domain?
Sure, definitely. So I think, one of the key themes which comes out, when anybody talks about blockchain, is number one, transparency,
Okay.
right? So the fact of the matter is that while you can have your own sort of, everybody has their own, you could say, blockchain wallet address,
Hmm.
depending on whichever blockchain you are, and you're on, let's say, Bitcoin address or Ethereum
Exactly.
address or whatever address may have you, like, whatever so whatever is there in your account, right, in your, let's say, your Bitcoin account, your blockchain account, whatever is there, it's open to everybody. So
Hmm.
it is, so any given moment of time, anybody's account can be audited. So a lot of people say that, oh, Bitcoin, you can never come to know anything, like, where is money going to. Actually, it is a lot more transparent than any Visa or Mastercard system there,
Yeah.
because there's so many transactions, you have no idea what's happening. In Visa
Yeah.
and Mastercard, you can do a transaction, for example, and send money from A to B and delete like the logs, and nobody will know what
Exactly.
happened,
Exactly.
right? Something like this on blockchain is impossible. So blockchain
Hmm.
actually can be monitored very easily, and there's a high degree of transparency. And when you bring in a high degree of transparency, then all sorts of interesting things are possible. Like, for
Hmm.
example, this entire, so if you look at the way the entire sort of, you could say, businesses these days, or rather, let's say, data oriented businesses are built these days, are built on basically selling information,
Yeah.
right? Where essentially you as a person are the product. and your information is being then, either used or misused or sold, to other companies, so as to be able
Yeah.
to create some form of value, where the focus is to figure out what you want, and in many ways preempt your thought process also to an extent, and be able to then, provide you goods and services. So you get these SMSs saying that, hey, would you like to buy shoes or something? And you must have started seeing how this works also, right? Like you Google, like, let's say, running shoes, and then you're randomly browsing
Exactly.
Amazon, it gives you a deal, right, on running shoes. Like, how
Exactly.
did this happen? Right. So this is kind of how the entire data-oriented economy seems to be functioning. Right. The blockchain economy is very different from this. So in the blockchain economy, all the information which is pertaining to you, right, is in many ways public, and at the same, in many ways, extremely private. So you as a person can choose not to share your information and about who you are, and yet be able to do transactions. So for example, I can do transactions in a blockchain network. I don't need to reveal my name, I don't need to reveal my sex, I don't need to reveal my age. So all of those things, which are very private to you, which is being misused against you, frankly speaking, when you're being profiled on the internet every time you log in, like, all of those things kind of go away. So privacy and transparency are handled very differently in blockchain, and this has a way of disrupting this entire data economy. So
Yeah.
this entire economy, which is built on identifying who you are and what your needs and wants are, and then how to weaponize that information, to sort of target you in some way or the other through ads, through, and even it's done even in political campaigns. Like, I don't know if you read about what
Yeah.
Cambridge Analytica did with
Exactly.
Facebook and during the US election. All of that
Yeah.
is impossible on blockchain, right? So it's in a strange way, it is extremely transparent, where you can see everybody's account information, but you don't know who they are, right? And this puts power back into the hands of the masses, because when people can't profile you, they can't target you, right? And so this is kind of why I feel blockchain from a decentralized perspective is extremely disruptive. Now there are other ways of looking at this disruption as well. So for example, what happens with blockchain also is that it removes the middleman from many of the transactions in which we are used to. So for example, let's say you are based in another country, I'm based in another country, I want to send funds to you. How do you do that? Visa.
Visa.
Right, there's literally no other way, right? You need some person who's in the middle, who essentially takes money from me and then gives it to you,
Exactly.
right? Blockchain essentially removes this middleman. Now I can transact directly with you, and when I can transact directly with you, everything now becomes in a way peer to peer, where
Yeah.
loans are peer to peer, like reconciliation of records are peer to peer, like everything now becomes peer to peer, where people are freely interacting with each other, and this technology, this blockchain network, is sort of facilitating all of this, right? So it removes all of these middlemen, and thereby all the inefficiencies which come with all these middlemen as well. So for example, let's say today, if you want insurance policy or something like that, you need to go to a bank branch, there's documentation, you do 100 different things, etc. Now, to a large extent, using mobile apps and where you can get instant loans, you have to an extent solved this. But with blockchain, it's entirely different, right? In blockchain, I can give you a loan, you can give me a loan, we can transact freely, and essentially you remove all of these other different parties who have come in the middle, right? Who essentially are bringing in either some level of efficiency, but at the same time a high degree of inefficiency. So when the entire world becomes peer to peer and everybody can transact freely, all sorts of interesting business models are possible. So what the blockchain network does is it considers the entire world as one, versus you are in this country, you use this currency, it doesn't matter. The currency is the
Exactly.
same, and everybody is the same, and everybody is equal in this world, right? And this is kind of how this technology can be extremely disruptive. And I encourage you to read more about it. This is obviously, this by itself is like a long conversation that could
Yeah.
go on and on, but I think you're beginning to understand this picture of how,
Exactly.
if you let people transact freely, remove all the middlemen, and at the same time bring in this whole concept of transparency along with privacy, where you cannot be targeted, that it completely disrupts the way we think about this entire world, right? And
Exactly.
or how business is being done for the, let's say, last 25, 30 years. So this
Yeah.
is kind of why people consider it very disruptive, and also, people also consider it dangerous to an extent, because they feel that maybe too much power is going in places where it should not be going. But this is kind of how I feel about this technology. And of course, I encourage people watching this, and you as well, to read more about this and ask questions.
Exactly.
So yes.
Also, now, one thing which comes to my mind after when you put this point, that like we know, when we are not, most of for most of the companies, we are the product, because we are giving them our
Yes,
data.
you are the product.
Sometime data that is too personal to us, and some which we don't realize in our mind
Yes.
also, that we are giving them, and we don't have that self realization as well. But
Yes.
okay, now that's something which is which we are giving unconsciously or subconsciously to
Yes.
the companies. uh, and they are providing us with some kind of value using that data, manipulating that data in some kind of way.
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
the thing is, again, the same point will come that people are too trained to think, in that centralized manner, because they are
That's
getting
true.
something which they actually don't want, but because the ads are showing, or because the marketing or the data is being used in such a way.
I understand. There's a level of convenience also
Exactly.
with this kind of system. I get that. I get that. And yes, clearly, like I said, this different way of thinking is something which will take time to catch on and for people to
Hmm.
learn more about. I totally agree. And but what I see in the world today is that yes, there is a level of convenience, no doubt. Like for example, when I'm typing something and Google autofills,
Hmm.
right? I do sometimes feel that wow, one click and it's done. But then everything you're doing also is being tracked,
Hmm.
right? And I think the more and more you sort of begin to think about it, what really becomes, you could say, more and more obvious is that how this actually, the convenience is sort of not worth the danger which you are sort of potentially putting yourself at,
Yeah.
right? So for example, typing something extra on the phone potentially may is something which is not that big of a pain
Hmm.
compared to being profiled 24/7 on the
Hmm.
internet.
Hmm.
Like everything you're doing is being watched by someone,
Hmm.
right? And he's watching you not with this aspect that he wants to keep you safe or something like that. It is really, but
Hmm.
how do I extract value from this person,
Hmm.
right? So it's almost like a salesman or somebody out there is constantly
Hmm.
watching you and trying to preempt, right? Isko abhi biscuit khana hai kya, like isko juta kharidna hai, like trying to figure that out. Yaar ye bhi na Swedish
Exactly.
order kar sakta hai, right? Isko na Swiggy ka order bhej
Yeah,
sakta
obviously,
hai, like
sometimes we
right?
don't even imagine, but after seeing those kind of ads, we actually go for it.
uh, it works. It
Yeah.
totally works. And why it works is because your intimate information is being grabbed. Like people are nowadays algorithms, of course, and we've read about this,
Hmm.
that they've become so powerful that to an extent they can, like you can to a very high degree of, let's say, correlation, you can sort of figure out what kind of, or preempt decisions which people are go on to make. Not all of them, but some of them,
Yeah.
like especially decisions around buying and all, which tend to tie into
Hmm.
commerce. So this is kind of what I feel, that there is a convenience, no doubt. And and we see that convenience every day, when you're typing
Hmm.
emails on Google, and sort of on Gmail, for example, and it gives you, it preempts what you're going to write. You can just press tab
Yeah.
and the sentence is complete, and like, wow, man, like I've saved so much time. This is so cool. But you got to understand, man, somebody's reading all your emails, all of them,
Exactly.
like everything, not just the professional ones, everything, whatever you're typing, everything, all the apps you're using, what you're researching, and I don't know if, like and more and more with Cambridge Analytica and all of those kind of sort of episodes, you kind of realize that this information is going to be misused
Hmm.
more than is going to be used for your benefit. And that's
Hmm.
kind of what we are seeing, because this information is being sold in the open market.
Hmm.
So this, I feel, productization of human beings is something which has to somehow like stop. Like I don't feel that this is how commerce should, or business should run. Like I don't see this as something very ethical. And
Okay.
of course, this is again a long debate, and we can
Yeah.
like debate on hours for this. But I do feel that this model has to change or morph in some form or the other. What it's going to be, I don't know. But decentralization and sort of this way of blockchain, where you have transparency and privacy, is one way of solving for those problems, where essentially you sort of stop this concept
Hmm.
of productization of a person, and you replace it with something else.
Exactly.
And and then you build convenience around that, sort of, you could say, different way of thinking. So yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. Also, like, could you think of right now, or like in your weirdest of imaginations, do you find a point where two things can go simultaneously, like where centralization and decentralization are going hand in hand? But I know that
Hmm.
might sound something very naive at this point of time,
No,
or
no, no,
a
not at
question.
all. Yeah, you have bought exactly the right point, which a lot of people are also discussing today. That okay, maybe not all the decisions need to be decentralized. Maybe some of them can, right? Like for
Hmm.
example, if there is, like, during a wartime scenario, like let's say somebody's crossed the borders, you cannot wait for everybody to go, and you need some
Exactly.
level of centralization there. You need immediate
Exactly.
response time. right? When
Exactly.
let's say like something horrible like that happens, but there are many decisions about let's say infrastructure, about let's
Hmm.
say um, food distribution, other
Hmm.
things like which can
Exactly.
be taken in a decentralized manner, right? So you
Exactly.
actually understood it exactly right, where I do feel that this is going to be that step, and essentially maybe the optimal step where certain decisions are centralized, which should be,
Yeah.
because you need that kind of response time in those situations. But then many decisions will also be decentralized,
Hmm.
right? About let's say public utilities and things like that, and
Yeah.
like so I do feel that it is going to be a combination which essentially offers the best compromise and the best way forward, then potentially this extreme of every all decisions centralized or all decisions decentralized. So
Exactly. Also, what kind of technological progress do you see in the coming years when we talk about
mhm.
Ethereum or blockchain as a technology? When we talk about
Right.
blockchain as a technology, what kind of
Mhm.
development you see in that domain in, like, say, coming 5 to 10 years? Because most of the people
Right.
all over the LinkedIn, all over the professional social medias and all,
Mhm.
are talking about that these 10 years are going to be something which would define a great advancement
Yes.
at every aspect of tech, be it technology,
No, definitely.
be it making leaders, becoming leaders, growing the economy of the country. So these 10 years are quite
Mhm.
going to be defined in every dimension. So how do you think
Right.
can blockchain how do you think about the evolution of blockchain in the coming 10 years or coming 5 years?
Sure, interesting question, definitely. And yes, I do feel that we as a civilization, not just as a people, but as human beings and as a civilization, we stand at this sort of juncture, right,
Hmm.
where we can either really elevate ourselves to like something amazing,
Yeah.
and the stuff like which we used to discuss in sci-fi, or potentially go down this very dystopian path,
Yeah.
right? And this is also interesting, and I'll come back to this later,
Exactly.
about how our thinking has evolved around this. But let's now focus on the question which is around blockchain technology, right? So what is going to happen? So now certain challenges around blockchain are going to be solved. To an extent, they're already solved, and they will be solved as we go forward, which are around performance, right? So
Hmm.
you have to build technology which can scale to millions of users,
Okay.
right? So that it can have that kind of impact. So how do you create blockchain technology which can scale to millions of users, right? And when you
Hmm.
work backwards from that problem, right, you begin to start to see all the problems you need to solve, not just on the education side, just telling people about how this technology works and clearing up all the
Hmm.
misinformation as well, but also on the technology side, where you need to build those scalability layers, you need to build all of that tooling, you need to build all that documentation. And at the same time, there is also this other thinking, as engineers, right? Like as an engineer, when i
Yeah.
when I think about this, see, technology ultimately is a way to solve a problem, right? It's the problem which we see. For example, if you look at the evolution of technology, of how we discovered fire to an extent, is that we wanted to keep ourselves warm and wanted to sort of a sense of security, or cook food, or those kind of things. And that's why we created this system of fire, where we discovered how to light
Hmm.
fire. Similarly, that's how we figured out the wheel, when we wanted to solve
Exactly.
for convenience, and sort of. So there is a problem, and then technology is a way of solving for that problem,
Hmm.
which is why technology, the march of technology, is always limitless, because there are always problems to be solved, and there is always a better way of solving it, right? Which is
Hmm.
where we see the relentless march of technology, and sort of this is how it is. So if you look at the problems you need to solve, for example, of when I say about sort of bringing the entire world closer, right, instead of sort of splitting it apart, bringing it closer, where people can transact more freely, where we again start thinking of ourselves as human civilization versus those identities which we built for ourselves, of for example, let's say race, color, creed, or
Hmm.
let's say even citizenship, right?
Hmm.
When we try to sort of look at these problems which we need to solve, about how do we create like a society which is connected to each other, which communicates with each other, essentially is like one, which is behaving as one,
Hmm.
and kind of start working backwards from those kind of things we need to solve. Like because when you talked about how these 10 years can elevate us as a human, as a civilization, so these are some of the things which we need to solve. We need to bring the world sort of closer to each other, versus all of these different ways which we think we always find new ways to divide ourselves. So looking at these kind of problems we need to solve, and these are problems which have to be solved at scale, right? These are problems which involve hundreds of millions of people. So blockchain technology, then if it has to scale to that kind of requirement and solve those kind of problems, then you need that kind of technology in it. Now there are many like different approaches here. There is also the advent of, let's say, quantum computing, which people feel will be solved in, let's say, next 5 to 7 years,
Okay.
because of advances in material science and our understanding of physics as well, of what happens at that level.
Hmm.
So then that will herald in these new kind of quantum compliant blockchain networks, which will be much more high performance, far more secure,
Okay.
and things like that. At the same time, what is also happening across the world is that networks are becoming faster. So, for
Hmm.
example, in India, we have amongst the cheapest data rates in the world.
Exactly.
Across the world, broadband connectivity, or rather, what I call networking in general, ability to connect to each other, is becoming
Hmm.
faster and cheaper. 5G, 6G, like so.
Hmm.
So all of these technologies, essentially, which are also happening, which alongside blockchain technology, will sort of enable sort of blockchain to really bring out its true potential. Because blockchain, it's the power of blockchain comes from the power of the network. The more
Yeah.
people who are using the blockchain, the more powerful the blockchain is. That
Hmm.
is how the technology is designed. So the
Exactly.
more people who are networked and connected across the world, the more people who can transact with each other, will result in a more powerful blockchain network, which will then have that
Hmm.
sort of impact at scale, which we are all talking about here. So
Hmm.
this is kind of what I feel will happen next in the next 5 to 10 years, where we will solve these kind of problems of
Hmm.
connectivity,
Hmm.
of, let's say, of computational power to an extent. Mobile phones will become cheaper at on your, for example, in your palms, you will be carrying supercomputers literally,
Hmm.
which are capable of amazing feats. And then, and when you allow these computers to be networked, across, at a global level, where people can anywhere across the globe can connect with each other, then you will begin to see a different kind of society, which we already see, right? Like, for example, people like you and me, we watch series on Netflix, etc.
Hmm.
We see certain things, and we become attuned to that culture,
Hmm.
right? We begin to understand how cultures across the world are different from us,
Exactly.
albeit in a theatrical sense, but we do begin to understand it. So now
Hmm.
today, for example, if I see, let's say, lots of TV series about Japan, for example,
Hmm.
let's say I see a lot of TV series about Japan or Korea, if I travel to that country, I won't feel out of place. Like, I'll
Yeah.
understand some of the cultural nuances,
Yeah.
right? So we already see this happening, where we are
Hmm.
becoming more culturally aware and more closer
Hmm.
as people across the globe, and this will only accelerate. And blockchain will then sort of tie in all of these people together and create this sort
Hmm.
of
Hmm. Hmm.
trustless way of transacting. Why I say trustless is because you don't need people in the middle to build that trust,
Exactly. Exactly.
right? Will then sort of create this kind of sort of, you could say, bedrock on which we can elevate ourselves as a society and start thinking of bigger problems which you need to solve. The kind of
Hmm.
things, if I dare say, and again, I don't want to sound sensationalist, but I dare say kind of problems which, let's say, Elon Musk talks about, which he says that,
Huh.
I want human beings
Yeah.
or human civilization to be an intergalactic civilization. So that's a problem you're solving at a civilization scale. It's not about, America and India and Africa and whatever. It's a civilization scale. So I think once we become closer as a people and we build these kind of interfaces and the technologies to support this kind of,
Hmm.
bringing us closer together, we can then start solving problems at a civilization scale. So then you
Exactly.
can find effective solutions to global warming, because that's a civilization problem.
Hmm.
So this is kind of what I see is going to happen, and this is why blockchain technology is so important, that it will bring people and the globe closer, and people will transact trustlessly. And then it
Hmm.
doesn't matter suddenly, because all of you using the same currency, using the same technology. It doesn't matter what nationality or those kind of things. All of those concepts simply melt away when
Exactly.
you have this kind of this kind of ecosystem. So that's kind of what my thinking is, and just to not take too much time, but just maybe a minute. One thing I also got to remark is that do you watch sci-fi? Like, do you watch sci-fi series? And
Yeah.
are you into that?
Yeah.
You've seen, right? So you would have noticed that in the early 90s and 2000s, all the sci-fi, like, kind of series which used to come out, used to
Yeah.
talk about this great human civilization, society, which would be there. So
Hmm.
when you watch Star Trek, when I used to, like, as a
Exactly.
child, when I used to watch Star Trek, I
Yeah.
used to be like, wow, this is the future. Space travel, cultures are together,
Yeah.
cooperating with each other. There are also problems. Human
Hmm.
beings have stopped thinking about, मेरे को इससे ये problem है,
Yeah.
whatever. Now we are thinking at, galactic civilization scale.
Hmm.
But,
Hmm.
that was, like, you could say, the early 90s and 2000s. Now, however, all the sci-fi
Yeah.
series paint an increasingly dystopian, sort of view of the future. So earlier we had Star Trek,
Yeah.
which was
Sort
about
of.
great human civilization. Like, today we have Black Mirror, which
Yeah.
tells you about all the bad things or all the wrong things which can potentially happen with technology. So I feel that, so if you, I don't know, as a person who's watched sci-fi over many years, like, I can't help but feel that blockchain technology will be one of the most powerful tools which will be able to enable
Yeah. Carry on, please.
Right. So, like I was saying, right. So sci-fi series in the 90s and 2000s were about this great future which we would have, and the ones which are there today are all about this dystopian future which we will have, which
Hmm.
is all terrible and dark.
Yeah.
So it's sort of interesting for me as somebody who's watched this over the years, and how our thinking
Hmm.
around technology has changed, where technology would make everything better towards where technology has made everything worse. And so we need to bring the optimism back. we need to get away from this dystopian, terrible way of thinking, and and look at, we need to look at the future with optimism that good things and great things are going to happen. So I really do hope that these technologies, kind of things I've talked about, come together and create this for us. So yeah.
Exactly.
So,
Also, do you see a way or certain measures or methods to actually educate people, or quite make them intrigue about these concepts? Do you find a way of doing this and helping out the people? Because after all, when people start accepting this technology or this concept of decentralization or whatever it may be, anything which is disruptive for the time, how do you
right.
think can people actually uh, get to know and get to educate themselves about such kind of concepts when that's
Right.
something very new for them?
No, definitely. So I think the most important thing which we can definitely do is to talk about it, right? Like what we are doing right now is
Hmm.
to just generally have this open-ended conversation and talk about what decentralization is, how one needs to think about decentralization, some of the pros and cons of it. Also, I do feel that like I was telling you, that to a large extent, a lot of information is already out there, in the public domain about this,
Hmm.
on YouTube videos from some people who have very good understanding of this technology and have talked about it, to courses which are now available. So to a large extent, this is already there. But I think this dialogue of people, we need to start openly discussing this new way of thinking. And and it's just only through this kind of public discussion will we really figure out what the pitfalls are, what the advantages are, and then maybe try and figure out what is the best way forward. Like one of the ways which you mentioned, where you have decentralized decision making, but you also have centralized decision making
Hmm.
together, which leads to, let's say, the best decision which you can take, right? So I think what's most important is open discussions about this. I have been trying to sort of talk to lots of people, and I know a lot of other experts and sort of other people in the blockchain industry, far more influential than I am, are also going on public forums and talking about this. Currently, the easiest way to get people interested in this technology is to tell them that Bitcoin, you can make a lot of money. And oh, really? What is this Bitcoin? Like, hands down, the most popular way of getting people, interested in this technology. But you can 10x your wealth. Like, what, really? Like, how
Actually,
do I do that?
that's quite
Like, but
fascinating,
but
because a lot of
right,
people
but
actually go for Bitcoin first, and then they come to know that something or something sort of blockchain also
right.
exists, and that's the main thing on which Bitcoin is existing. But they don't know about it.
Uh,
It's just the
I,
Bitcoin hype.
I I know, right? I was very against this, like this kind of like, this is not the way I would like to educate people. I would like to
Exactly.
educate people like this, where first I talk about decentralization, then I talk about blockchain. But I mean, there's no perfect solution out there. So if people say, "What is decentralization, etc.?" Do you want to make money? Like and then you kind of no, I'm just kidding. I wouldn't go down that path. But I do feel that yes, like what has happened is this whole conversation about Bitcoin, about Tesla investing in Bitcoin,
Hmm.
1.5 billion dollars, no less,
Hmm.
and more centralized, sort of, I would say, like typical financial sort of companies from Wall Street and other investment banks are now seriously looking at investing in this technology. I think this already has created a huge amount of interest,
Hmm.
and financial incentives are a very strong motivator, no
Exactly.
doubt, about these things. So yeah, so whatever works, I feel that as long as more and more people have this open discourse, that will lead to sort of more understanding in the world about how this potentially, how you can think about this concept. And yeah, and I do feel that that eventually it will come to a point where people will focus more on sort of the decentralization and the advantages of that versus which
Yeah.
crypto should I buy. Please tell me, like
Yeah.
so we need to kind of maybe step away from that kind of discourse. So yeah.
Exactly. Well, that was great talking to you, Arjun, and I hope you
Right.
enjoyed this conversation.
No, absolutely, of course. I think it was
Thanks,
great, and
thanks,
I'm so
thanks a lot
happy
for
that we
joining.
got a chance to talk about this. Of course. No,
Yeah.
thank you so much for having me, and I'm really happy we got a chance to discuss this. And yeah, and I wish you guys all the best, and I hope we can do this more often so that
Yeah,
more people can
definitely,
learn
for sure. We
about
can
this
sort
technology.
of go deeper into such kind of conversations and try to educate
Hmm.
people in the correct manner.
Of course, in the correct manner, right? So great. So thank you so much, and yeah, and
It
take
was
care.
great having you. Thanks for joining the show.
All right, sure, take care. Bye.